We'll do it live. We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
Why, hello, everybody. This is Dylan Moore and Nima of IridaTV coming to you and doing it live on December 14th, 2022. It's Wednesday, and we're back for some more exciting stuff. We decided that we wanted to talk about some heresy today. Nima has some deep insights on Gnosticism that I think is a good follow-up from what we talked about on Monday. And if you haven't checked out what happened on Monday, it will be uploaded soon. I think it's a very good philosophical, theological discussion that isn't as boring as that sounds. I think we made it pretty fun. On does basically logic require faith, which I think was a very, very fascinating discussion. And so we're going to leapfrog from that to heresy and Gnosticism, and see if we can make sense of this thing that I think most people think is kind of this cult sort of background niche concept that I think Nima's going to make the argument for is more in our faces than we think it is. But before we wax theological, I don't know, cult, philosophical, whatever category Gnosticism falls into, I did want to do a quick current events sort of situation that Elon Musk continues his bulldozer through Twitter and has gotten rid of, I forgot what it's called, the ethics committee or whatever, that's supposed to be this group of people, including representatives from the ADL that's supposed to monitor what exactly is or isn't hate speech. And I've been making fun of the in quotes right wing here for a while now regarding this, because Elon Musk comes into Twitter, which is this total shit show before Elon Musk. And he comes in and he doesn't immediately create Twitter free speech utopia. And the right takes this as, see, he's in bed with the leftists. He's part of the Illuminati overlords. I'm not saying he's not part of the Illuminati overlords. I don't know what Elon Musk is doing in the shadows. But he isn't instantaneously doing all the stuff that they want. And so they take this as, oh, see, he's on the other side. But slowly and surely he's dripping this stuff out, because Elon Musk, at the beginning, because he's still saying, okay, you know, he's still using the hate speech language. We're reducing hate speech on the site. Here's the evidence for that. And he's saying, okay, we're going to give general amnesty, but the general amnesty hasn't hit, and he's saying no to Alex Jones, and so he's not this free speech absolutist. So, Twitter's still going to be horrible. But, I mean, just put yourself in the guy's shoes for a second, which is going to be hard because you guys have never acquired a business and know what to do with it, right? This guy acquires the business with 7,500 employees, I think was the number roughly. And you don't just walk into a business after buying it and just destroy everything without knowing what's going on. And furthermore, if we've learned anything from Kanye West, if you say the wrong things at the wrong time, groups that shall not be named can ruin your day. They can ruin your day no matter how big you are. And so what does Elon Musk turn around and do? He meets with this ethics committee when he gets in there. Announces, hey, we're meeting with the ethics committee. The right freaks out like, oh my God, see, now you're under the influence of the ADL. And then nixes the ethics committee as of yesterday or today. And what was his reasoning? Was it child abuse or pedophilia that the ethics committee was failing to address on Twitter?
One of their missions is to address child exploitation. So I was just looking for his exact wording of why he did it. All I can find is hit pieces right now. So I'm not sure if you know
let's go with child exploitation for the moment. I don't want to go digging. I don't think we need the exact wordage.
I mean, I didn't even know he said this. He actually said that
Oh yeah, I saw that earlier. It looks like Yoel is arguing in favor of children being able to access adult internet services in his PhD thesis. Burn. Burn.
That is brutal.
So let's look at what Elon Musk did. So he gets on there, and if he had gotten rid of that ethics committee immediately in a splurge of free speech absolutism, all the big guns would have been targeted at him immediately. He waits a little bit, and then gets rid of it due to its failure to address child exploitation. Now the enemies can't criticize him. He's got him over the belt. What are they going to do? Hey, now you're promoting hate speech because you're not allowing child exploitation. Shit, I can't say that. I mean, guys, I think it's time to recognize that Elon Musk is probably smarter than you. Just saying. And if anything, from the beginning of this whole Twitter takeover, he's consistently sent out distractions before making a move. Have you noticed that, Nima? Like he'll kind of send something out over here and gets people focused over here, and then he comes this way in the way that he moves. And so, I mean, it sounds like he knows what he's doing and you don't, and you're falling for the bait. What were you going to say?
Well, I'm still kind of just shocked.
Oh, you're still in awe of him calling out Yoel like this?
No, but the fact that guy wrote a PhD thesis on Grindr. I mean, that alone is okay. I guess that's the kind of shit that people do in business.
Remind me what Grindr is. What the fuck is Grindr again?
Grindr is a gay hookup.
Oh god!
It actually came out before. It was it came out before Tinder, before all these other ones. But so he wrote a PhD thesis on Grindr, and not only that, he wrote a PhD thesis explaining here the fact that people under 18 are on these services already indicates that we can't readily dismiss these platforms out of hand as loci for queer youth culture. So,
because the fact that it's happening, we shouldn't just stop it because it's already happening.
Here is someone suggesting there's a link between queer youth culture and pedophilia. And nobody seems to have a problem with that.
Well, not only is he suggesting it, I read this. He's not necessarily promoting it, but he's saying, "Hey, we shouldn't just stop this."
Of course,
yeah,
of course. He wouldn't say something overtly ridiculous. He would. I mean, if I was a pedo creep writing a PhD thesis, I would probably phrase it something like this. Like legalistic. Even with the server's extensive content management, Grindr may well be too lewd or too hookup-oriented to be safe and age-appropriate resource for teenagers. But the fact that people under 18 are on these services already indicates that we can't readily dismiss these platforms out of hand as loci for queer youth culture, rather than merely trying to absolve themselves of legal responsibility, or worse, trying to drive out teenagers entirely. Service providers should instead focus on crafting safety strategies that can accommodate a wide variety of blah, 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 blah.
Yes, so basically, there's a resource that's allowing gay men to hook up with children or teenagers, and we should think carefully before we just dismiss that out of hand, is what he's saying.
Yes, it's something that in fact, we cannot dismiss that idea, because these people are already on this platform. So
yeah, they're already doing it, therefore it's good. What were we talking about? Pragmatism on Monday? Holy shit. Yeah.
We just derived an ought from it. Yeah. Well, yeah, and plus it makes Grindr money, obviously, to do this kind of stuff. So yeah, we're back to pragmatism and science. Basically, as a cloak for their personal goals, or for their monetary goals, business goals, and sexual goals in some people's case.
Right. Well, I just in general on Elon Musk taking over Twitter, like I said, I don't know what side this guy's on ultimately, and I just want to let everyone know that he is breaking the toys that are being used against us. And so, at the moment, here's a pragmatist argument, I guess. At the moment, just let him benefit us. Don't just stop worrying that he's not an absolute free speechist fast enough for your liking, right? Just take the gifts he gives you and run. Shit.
Right.
Okay, that said, let's get back into
Actually,
heresy. Oh, well,
yeah.
we got more first.
Since we just referenced like a real world instance of something we discussed in this paper, this theoretical paper last time, something else comes to mind, but I don't know if it's relevant. If you have something that you're burning to jump to next.
No, I was just going to jump into the Gnosticism.
Yeah, right. So before we do that, I want to get back into how we discussed we discussed the lack of justification for the concept of causality in all autonomous philosophies, autonomous man philosophies.
Well, and to be clear, when we say autonomous, we mean men attempting to derive philosophy without utilizing an argument from God. Like man figuring it out from himself as opposed to man saying, I got something from God to help me figure this out.
Right. So we have like some of the most prominent atheist philosophers, such as David Hume, suggesting that we can't prove causality on the grounds of our own hypothesis, on the grounds of empiricism, on the grounds of rationalism. Right. We can't prove that the billiard ball moved because some other billiard ball hit it, right? So that may seem ridiculous, right? So, well, of course that billiard ball is hitting that other billiard ball. But what we see is that there is a lack of appreciation for the fact that what you think is a causality might not actually be a causality in today's world. And so the prime example that I was thinking of was, doing this whole Kufit narrative.
Remember, we're on YouTube.
Right.
We are on YouTube. Right. Choose your next words carefully.
That's why I am. That's why I changed the term on this.
Okay.
So, but anyway, they were suggesting that because there's a positive test result for something, and then that person died after that positive test result for your magic test, that the thing that the test detects caused the death.
Right.
Right? That's been inferred just from the very get-go and assumed by all these genius scientists without questioning. Why? Because they don't even really believe that causality needs to be proven. If they can convince people that there is a causality, and if it produces the desired results, then they don't see a problem, right? So I think this is just a very striking, practical, relevant example of where this lack of grounding of rationalism, empiricism, all the Enlightenment philosophies that challenge the belief in God can lead us to. So the scientist ends up completely underappreciating their lack of precise knowledge as to whether there is actually a causality in the theory that you're proposing, and also a lack of appreciation for the imperfection of the instruments that you're using, the actors involved, their individual motivations, and then leading to, well, but because this all, the scientists followed the process ABC, so it's true. It must be true.
Yeah.
If that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I mean, I've heard the description that human beings are cause hungry. Right, we're constantly looking for explanation for causes, but we're not too interested in really determining if that's the thing. And the guy made kind of an argument from survival where, if you see a many-spotted thing in the woods, you don't have time to discuss what that many-spotted thing is. You just need to run, right? Because a jaguar or whatever about to eat you. So fundamentally, I'm not arguing this. I'm saying this was the argument. Fundamentally, we're geared toward giving a reason for something, and not too concerned about proving it, or following up and making sure that that reason is or isn't accurate. And so, unfortunately, I think that makes us really, presuming that that's true, that makes us very susceptible to something like what you just described, where if we say, okay, here's a thing that happened, somebody died, here's a test that indicates a disease, well, I'm just not going to say anything and let you assume, because you're cause hungry, that the disease caused the death.
Right, and then to make this whole example even more, this practical example even more ridiculous. Then afterwards, people said we have the cure against the bad thing. It's our stabbies over here, and they start dispensing the cure. And then people start absolutely dying and getting crippled and reporting adverse effects in record numbers.
But the cause and effect are unconnected in this case.
But because we don't say that there's a causality, there's none.
Yeah.
So the causality can be conjured up or wished away at will at any given point. That's what the lack of grounding, I think, leads us to. Ultimately, leads the autonomous scientist towards it. Just
I see what
turns
you're
them
saying.
into arrogant persons.
Well, and then I mean the history of science proves this, right? I mentioned this in the last show that science progresses at the rate at which scientists die, because each generation of scientists gets enamored in their own theories, and they reject the theories of the next generation coming up, and the next generation doesn't get to say it until the old generation dies.
I mean, isn't that exactly what just happened? It's like, oh, there's people dying. Well, it's because we don't know. It's spontaneous. It's because of climate change. It's because the anti-vaxxers made them nervous. It's because they come up with all kinds of bullshit to evade the truth.
Yep.
Of what's going on.
Yep. And
what makes them money now is to wish away the causality. What made them money before was to imagine the causality into existence.
Well, and then it's playing God, right? Is to say, I determine what causes things. Which, if you listen to what we talked about, and if you listen to what we talked about on Monday, this is kind of the thing where basically we came to the conclusion that if you have the autonomous view of philosophy, which is to say man can create it himself, it ultimately leads to something like that, because there's no ultimate backing to check yourself against.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a free for all.
Yeah. So let's go into Gnosticism. And
yeah,
before we get into Gnosticism, I had one interesting interaction with Gnosticism when I was like 19, 20, something like that, where a friend of mine, Nima's met him, Eric, whom I inherited a extensive library from, took me to some Gnostic gathering where, I mean, you know, the church, supposedly, this is the Protestant argument, is you know, wherever anybody meets. It was something like that where these people did these Gnostic services out of their house. It was a husband and wife couple. And I'm like, I'm into anything weird. Let's go. So we went there, and I mean, basically the husband did this presentation, utilizing the Kabbalistic tree of life to understand, you know, our placement in the universe, and then there was an emphasis on understanding the concept of the pentagram, whether the pentagram is right side up or upside down, because the pentagram, according to them, represented the four elements: fire, water, earth, and air, and the human soul, the human mind. And if the pentagram is right side up, the four elements serve the human, or if the pentagram is upside down, the human serves the four elements. So and I mean, I think we're going to, the conversation is going to go here where you see this very, very distinct separation between the material and the spiritual world, where the spiritual world is really seen as an enemy, and that it's the satanic view is to have you serving the elements as opposed to having the elements serve you. I guess more probably appropriately serve God. So once upon a time, I was interested in such stuff, but honestly, the whole rejection of the material world thing is kind of boring to me at this point. And so, whenever I hear people talk about Gnosticism, I kind of roll my eyes, which is what happened when Nima was like, "I want to talk about Gnosticism today." I'm like, God.
Well, it's important to understand
yes.
People's drivers and motivations, I think. So from that standpoint, I think it explains a lot, actually.
Yes, and in which case, please start explaining, because that is kind of the my commentary on Gnosticism until you say more.
Right. Okay. So
yeah,
so far we haven't really actually explained what Gnosticism is in a nutshell. So I think the simplest way of explaining it is it's an early Christian sect, a Christian Jewish sect around 100 AD, which took the Bible but applied a twist to it, a slightly different interpretation of it. I don't know if you're aware of.
It's one of the many heresies, or I should say, it's one of the many interpretations of the Christian world in the early Christian world that had to be battled over at that time. Yeah. And the Catholic Church obviously was the one that ended up winning and determined that Gnosticism was a heresy.
Yeah. So basically, what Gnosticism says is that there is there's the highest God, the top God, who's like some unspecific entity, and then that God created a lesser God, which is generally referred to as a demiurge in belief systems and other, pagan religions. For example, in the Roman or Greek pantheon, Zeus has been associated with the demiurge. But basically, they believe that that demiurge is the god that has created the earth, not the highest god, but rather a lesser divinity. I think also Satan, Lucifer, maybe this kind of creature in their interpretation of the Bible has created the earth, and they also believe that the God of the Old Testament, by the way,
is Satan.
Is this Satan, exactly. And they believe that the good God basically sits outside of this world, and that Adam and Eve were trapped by the demiurge on earth. Was actually a messenger of the good God, trying to guide Adam and Eve out of that prison that the demiurge put them in, into the good world that was created by the good God. So the demiurge is basically a lesser deity who tried to recreate the good God's world, but because he's of lesser status, he couldn't remember everything. He sort of forgot some details and sort of created a flawed world. So Gnosticism believes that humanity, for that reason, is fundamentally flawed and needs to be perfected. And
which just from that explanation alone, we can see why this is a heresy, because the Christian teaching is that you can't be perfected, therefore you need Jesus. It's impossible for you to perfect yourself.
Right. Yeah. So the Christian theology is this earth was created by the ultimate God, mm-hmm. and in order to get back into union with Him, you need to do these things. By the way, somebody's chatting to us. Is this live or is it pre-recorded? Something is wrong. It's choppy, like you're cutting out. I hope you guys fix it.
Yeah, I think he dropped probably because it was choppy, but would have wanted to ask him to try on something other than YouTube. But that's good feedback. And yes, this is live and it will be recorded, so you will get a non-choppy version. Nima's typing furiously.
Yeah, I'm just letting you know this will also be recorded. Try one of our.
Well, I don't think he's there anymore, Nima. If you look over at the destination.
Yeah, maybe if you can expect it.
Okay.
So humanity needs to be perfected, and by just understanding, becoming more enlightened, and knowing more and more and more, your status in terms of what happens after you die will be determined based on how much you knew, just how much you were inducted into the secrets of
that's interesting.
God.
I haven't heard. I never followed enough to get to that to learn that point.
Right. So, and this is kind of in line with the Platonic belief that there's one God, there's no Trinity, there's no duality. I don't think it's there's one God, and your level of enlightenment determines where you end up. You may actually get reborn as a squirrel, if you were of lesser status. So it's kind of also tied to reincarnation, apparently, which I didn't know. But if you are like a...
I want to switch this back to our videos. Sorry to interrupt. I want to switch this back.
Yeah. If you're like a top philosopher dude, then you get into a higher realm and higher spiritual union with God. So that's kind of, I guess, Gnosticism is a big tent, but that's sort of in a nutshell what they believe.
Well, and real quick thing on the Platonism. If you read Plato's Republic, the last chapter is really interesting because Plato kind of describes a situation where what reincarnation might look like in the underworld, where basically he describes all these famous Greek figures in the underworld after they died, and that I don't know if it was Hades or some other god, had these tablets for to pick out what your next life is going to be. So basically, you can pick up the tablet and read, this one's a king. I want to be this guy. And so whatever deity it was, puts all these tablets on, and all these famous Greek heroes like Agamemnon and Odysseus and Achilles and all these people, they rush for the tablets because they all want to get the good ones. And it was one of them ends up. I can't remember. There's a famous Aeschylus play about this guy who ends up devouring his own children. His children are given to him for food, and he doesn't realize it. And so he picks this up because he reads. He's trying to get in there fast and realizes it's. He reads the top and he says it's a king. And after he picked it, he read it further and saw that his future was to devour his own children, and then he was very distraught. And Odysseus, actually, he didn't rush in because I guess Odysseus had enough adventure for his life that he slowly walks in and he's picking through the remains going, where's the guy who just kind of, sits on the back porch for the end of his days relaxing because I've had enough of that shit, thanks. But the point being, somebody was talking about reincarnation in the classical world. And at some point it dropped out. And maybe you're suggesting here that this kind of got incorporated into the Gnostic version, even though it was kicked out of the Orthodox Christian version?
Well, I'm saying that, definitely, because Orthodoxy and Gnosticism are like polar opposites.
Yeah.
Of course, the Orthodox would kick that out. But I also read somewhere that I think it was when I was reading up on the demiurge, that, for example, Zeus is associated with the concept of the demiurge, So there's some parallels between the Platonic belief system and the Gnostic belief system, definitely.
Word. So before we hit the record button, you mentioned that you wanted to draw some modern parallels of maybe we can understand art a little bit better that's shoved down our throats if we understand Gnosticism. Because actually, before you even get into that, I do want to mention this. So we're talking about this cult/heresy that existed in the 1st century AD, and it's kind of like, well, what does this have to do with anything? I occasionally listen to this Catholic podcast that regularly has this bishop on to talk about whatever the heck they're talking about. I can't remember his name. The podcast is called Word on Fire. And he did this one show talking about separate heresies, and he mentioned that the Gnosticism heresy, he said people don't realize how live and well Gnosticism is today. And if my anecdote was any credence to that, yeah, I mean, I went to some Gnostic sermon when I was fucking 20 years old, right? So I bring that up because it's not like we're just, exploring some historical oddity here. We're exploring something that still very well exists today and may help us understand what the, dare I say, power structure is set up as.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just real quick. I just pulled it up on the Demiurge real quick. The philosophical usage of the proper noun derived from Plato's Timaeus, written in 360 BC, where the Demiurge is presented as the creator of the universe. Demiurge is also described as a creator in the Platonic and Middle Platonic philosophical traditions. So Demiurge is a fashion of the real perceptual world after the model of ideas. So Plato is the realm of ideas, which is the perfect realm, and created sort of by the one, and the Gnostic Demiurge created the physical universe.
Okay, and then I do want to say this. Gnosticism, for whatever reason, is in love with using Greek instead of translating it into English. So I just went and looked up the etymology of demiurge, and I find this helps a lot with understanding what the hell these Gnostics are talking about. Demiurge is from a Latinized form of Greek demiurgos, literally public or skilled worker or worker for the people. Yeah. And then this goes on. It says in the Gnostic system. Yeah, in the Gnostic system, this is conceived as being subordinate to the supreme being, and sometimes as the author of evil. So basically, if we've got this this separation, distinct separation between the spiritual and material realms, the public or skilled worker is separate from God. And so this public skilled worker creates the universe, and he screwed it up because he's not God.
Right. He screwed it up. He forgot some things. He didn't get the proper manual or blueprints from the big guy, and so he created this flawed world, right? And so that's their version of the Christians would just say, "Well, the world is fallen," and so that's why it's flawed. And he's saying, "No, it's because the guy screwed up. He created an imperfect world, but we can perfect this world." And yeah, I thought it was interesting that they point out it's an artisan-like figure, right? It's an artist, is a skilled craft worker who makes or creates material objects. What does that remind us of, by the way? It reminds me of Freemasonry, right? Because that's how they see themselves. They see themselves as builders and artisans of a new, more perfect world. In this kind of in the spirit of Gnosticism, I guess. I mean, I'm not an expert on any of these things, right? So just thinking out loud, basically. So we were gonna okay. So why does this help us understand art? At least me, for example. So I've been rewatching Westworld, and Westworld is a show.
Don't forget to switch us back over.
Right. Westworld is a show where some software engineer played by Anthony Hopkins creates a physical fake world where robots live, basically, and humans can go into that world and visit and enjoy themselves. Have a good time. Go on a Wild West hunt. Go on a whatever you want to do. It's like where people go.
Is it kind of a Matrix thing where you connect into it, or it's actually out there?
No, it's physical. It's actually a physical place that this corporation named Delos has sort of walled off, and has with mountains. It looks kind of like Utah. You know, if you pull up some images from Westworld, it's very beautiful imagery actually. And it was shot in Arizona and Utah, I think. But so it's kind of like a Western world where people go to have a good time. You know, it's like your best and your worst instincts. You can just let rip inside Westworld.
Real quick, I looked up Delos because that rang a bell, and Delos is an island in Greece, and it's the reputed birthplace of Apollo and Artemis.
Oh,
Apollo
wow.
being the god of light and music. So I have no idea if that's relevant, but we're pointing out.
Yeah, Apollo is kind of considered the foremost god of the Greek pantheon. Even those people say Zeus, but Zeus is just a father. But Apollo is kind of like the main god for whatever reason, or probably the most popular god of the Greek pantheon at the time. So that's interesting. Yeah. So this guy James Delos, he buys up this startup which has robots in it that are still a little imperfect and naive, and then they start having people join this world. They're like, hey, come have a good time in this world. We won't watch you. But in reality, they're watching all the real humans that are coming into this world and recording all of their data. And that's basically a lot of what Westworld season. So there's some spoilers here, unfortunately, but I'll try to keep it more generic. But they go into this world, and the company Delos starts recording all their data. And that's not clear in the beginning. In the beginning, it's more like, hey, these people are just going here to have a good time. But then it turns out Delos is recording all your data. And then in the later season, we learn that Delos sold a treasure trove of this data to an entrepreneur who used that to create an AI brain.
Isn't this literally what happens with Facebook?
That's exactly. That's what I'm saying. Westworld is very much a metaphor for social media, for big tech, I believe. And I was actually talking to that with Katya the other day, and she was watching season 1, so it didn't make sense. But then as you get to season 2, you start realizing, yes, it's a metaphor for social media. And so, anyway, so he sells all this data to some AI brain corporation. And what happens in season 1, towards the end of season 1, some of the robots that live inside Westworld become conscious of themselves and start noticing, hey, this isn't really the real world. The real world is out there. This is a fake world created by some material creator. So I'm kind of wondering, is that like a metaphor? Is that like
my mind immediately went there. My mind immediately, so maybe these robots are kind of the demiurge.
Well, no, the demiurge would be the human guy who created this fake world.
Oh,
right. And the robots are like Adam and Eve trapped inside the fake world.
Now maybe they're kind of the first Gnostics going, wait a minute, there's material world.
Yeah.
There's this other world.
Yeah. Okay. Exactly. So then they escape that world, they make it into the real world, and different robots have different objectives of what they want to do in the real world. Like one of them wants
do these robots look? I haven't seen the show at all. These robots look like humans?
Yes, look and act and feel exactly like humans. They're like perfect, almost perfect robots. They have some minor flaws at times, right? And a lot of them go mad at one point. So, I mean, a lot of robots, as a matter of course, they just go mad because there's issues with the data and stuff. But these robots, they stay sane. They escape the fake world, and they have different objectives in the real world. One of them wants to start a coup because she has so much contempt for what has been done to them. They've been experimenting around.
A coup within the company, or a coup within the country, or a coup?
Starting with company, but I think she wants to control the real world, is what she's saying. But she realizes the first step, I think that's my interpretation, is to get a hold of this data company, because this data company that show you how much power you have. This goes more to season 3 then. How much power you have if you have all this data on everyone. You know how all things you can do. But so they escape this world, and so, like I said, some of these escapee robots want to do a coup. There's another robot, Bernard, who's like friendly with humans. He doesn't hate humanity, and so he doesn't like that she wants to take down humanity. So he tries to stop her. And then there's also this guy named Sirach, who's like
human or robot?
He's a human.
Okay.
And he is the guy who that data treasure trove of data was sold to early on, like a certain amount of data. And he created this AI brain, and he basically he's a philanthropist. He talks about too many humans on Earth, and
so it sounds very philanthropic. Yes.
It's like, yeah, I hate humans. I think he also talks about somewhere somebody gives like a climate change lecture, and it's like, oh, it's always this. By the way, this is written by Michael Crichton originally. He was a climate change skeptic, and so they have some elements of the philanthropy in there. So anyway, he's a multi-billionaire philanthropist who buys and takes down regimes at his will, puts regimes in place in Latin America at his will. But he always talks about how there is no God, this world is imperfect, but I can make humanity more perfect by merging with the machines. Right,
and because there's no God and I'm autonomous, I get to define what perfection is.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a Gnostic element to Masonry, I guess, Gnostic element, where this guy just wants to perfect humanity, and I guess that's his hope for salvation, is that he reaches such a high level of achievement and knowledge because he has all this data, gnosis, so that ultimately he can, I guess, join the. Although he also says he doesn't believe in God. He actually. Oh, here's a funny part. He takes one of the robots, one of the more powerful robots from Westworld, because she made herself more powerful. She manipulated her own code, but she's still trapped in that world. He takes her out of that world, and he tells her, if you help me get the data from Dolores, which is the robot who wants to do the coup, then I will send you to a virtual nirvana, which they actually, inside Westworld, they have a virtual heaven where if you go through a door, your physical robot body just drops down a cliff, but you feel like you're living in a virtual world that doesn't require any material, right? So to you, it feels the same. And so he promises her eternal life in that virtual world if she helps him basically catch Dolores so he can get all this data so he can dominate the world.
Okay. So
then in season 3, it becomes it goes much more into what's going on in the real world. I don't know if they specify what year it is, but it is really like a virtual, like an AI dominated world where the most powerful mega corporations are basically data and AI companies who, like, when you order a car, it's a driverless car, it shows up, it picks you up, takes you where you want, unless the guy who owns the company doesn't want you to do this or that, it interferes. This is where the data power comes in. And it's a world where, by the way, feature of Westworld is there's almost no government anywhere. There's rarely any sense of nations, or if it's a city, they mention as a matter of fact, okay, this is in San Francisco, and this is in China somewhere. But it doesn't really matter where it is. When they talk about where are we going, I just landed at Delos, I just landed in this corporation, or I just landed at Insight, which is the AI brain corporation. So it's and no police ever gets involved. It's always corporate squads that hunt you down. So it's kind of like an ANCAP world, if you will.
Well, it's also kind of like the Platonic city-state, right? Where again, you mentioned this before we hit the record button, but talking about Center for Self-Governance identifying that Charles Merriam put this playbook together based basically on Plato's Republic, of how to get rid of the nation state and replace it with a modern city state. And the way to do that is to start melting all the barriers between power and melting the barriers between corporate and government, which is something that's going on. We see it through things like the ESG, what was that, the environmental, social, and governance policies that are starting to be applied to publicly traded companies. Is that if we start melting these things, it doesn't matter where the power comes from, we still get it. And then we cluster it in these superpopulation centers, which we see is what's happening. People are that there's constantly policies being enacted to get people out of the country and into the cities where they're more controllable. And so basically, instead of Washington, instead of the state of Washington, we have the city-state of Seattle that controls everything. And in New York, we have the city-state of New York City that controls everything. And we still have some people out in the country, but the city is the main controller. And this has been complained about for, as long as I've ever thought about it or read about it. And it's something specifically that the founding fathers, we're going to create the electoral college to prevent this because we know it can happen, right? Well, the push is there, and so we got Gnosticism on here, we got Platonism on here, and neither of us are really experts to draw a clear line in between. But I think your point is pertinent, which is that we're seeing this art form, which is maybe it's predictive programming, or maybe it's a warning, right, of what the Illuminati overlords seem to be pushing for.
Yeah. So I think it's perfect predictive program. Maybe a warning, like Michael Crichton actually. He actually was a smart guy, and he was not necessarily down with the Hollywood agenda. And Westworld was actually a mini-series that was shot a couple of decades ago, like two episodes or so. And then I guess he couldn't get enough people motivated to help him out. It was very early on in his career. So Michael Crichton, by the way, he's a medical doctor who ended up never practicing medicine, or a very brief time only, becoming a best-selling book author. And by the way, also has been a Hollywood director on the side since, I believe, the 70s, right? So the first Westworld came in the 70s. And then just now, in I think 2015 or so, they started this relaunch of Westworld. And then he died very recently. And he died pretty young, I think, too. So we can't really
ask him what he was thinking
anymore, I guess. But yeah, I think
that was. That did.
I think it's
like, maybe we can get him on the show and he can just tell us what he's doing. Yeah.
No, but yeah, I think it's absolutely, like you said, it's a warning. When you look at all this futuristic stuff, the AI stuff, it's not necessarily portrayed in a positive light. The people who get into power, they don't get there for virtuous reasons. They don't have really honorable motives. It's a lot of kind of pragmatism, free for all. If it works, if it makes money. And then, of course, if you have this ideology of Gnosticism or some kind of idea that you have to perfect mankind, which that is Gnosticism, then you end up like the Sirach guy, who, by the way, Sirach, spelled backwards, I noticed is cares. I don't know if that's to do anything with anything. But you end up like now you have a spiritual motivation on top of your profit motive to do that kind of stuff.
Well, and then again, it's like we were talking about on Monday, that okay, you have the spiritual motivation, but you're the center of that spiritual world. So you get to play God and decide what is perfection.
Yeah, you're the center of the material world, but you hope to join some higher realm by becoming more knowledgeable and by getting all the data on everyone and everything.
Well, and then this is.
Oh, and also, I think, sorry to interrupt. Also, part of Gnosticism, or maybe some branch of Gnosticism, a particular version of it, believes that salvation on earth is possible. So ultimate happiness and whatever.
And then also with Gnosticism, you don't like this interpretation of Jesus. It's not a person that came and died for your sins. It's this concept. There's this Christ consciousness thing. So, which I'm sure is a heavy reason why it's declared a heresy by the church. But it's
yeah. If you can talk more about that, because I don't really actually I have no idea what Gnosticism says about Jesus.
Oh, well, like I said, I'm not an expert at it at all. I just know that they don't look at Jesus as in the terms of, here is a person who was on earth that did these things, that had a body that got sacrificed for you, and that got raised from the dead, and then therefore you could be saved. Like, they don't have that. It's that there's this Christ consciousness that you can achieve, presumably through gnosis, through knowledge. Right, and one of the things I've heard this criticism against Gnosticism, and I think I agree with it.
So that does it mean that Christ, the historical figure Christ, didn't even exist?
I don't know whether how they tackle whether or not he exists, but in terms of what Christ is supposed to do, I think it's more in the lines of what you were saying, was attaining perfection. You attain the Christ consciousness.
Okay.
Or you develop some sort of relation to that Christ consciousness. And here's me trying to remember back to that goddamn thing I went to when I was like 20. But, they had the Kabbalistic tree of life pulled up. And of course, if you know, in fact, Nima, can you pull up
I'll find
a tree of life? Because I find it to be a fascinating map for discussions like this. Pulling it up. Yeah, go ahead and maximize that thing. Okay, so we've got these 10 spheres. If you count it, there's 11, but one of them doesn't technically count, which is the dot, which is in the center, the second one down from the top. So the physical world that we see and live in is supposed to be described by the thing at the very bottom, which is Malkuth. And I know I'm mispronouncing all this stuff. I have no idea about how to pronounce Hebrew. So Malkuth is like the actual world that we live in. And all these levels above are different forms of reality that get closer and closer to God, which is the thing at the top, which is Kether. Right? And so if we look, and I remember the conversation that we were having when I attended this thing was actually largely focused on number 9. So Malkuth at the bottom is number 10. Number 9 is Yesod. I can't remember what. Yeah, Yesod. Which is called the foundation. And this is where the energetic world kind of exists. Where, for example, if we say, okay, you got to visualize something and put your energy toward it before you can do it. That sort of stuff exists, is described by this Yesod, right? But when you keep going up, so there's that dot, right? That dot separates the physical world, which is everything below it. And I may have sounded like I'm contradicting myself where I said, well, okay, number 10 is the physical world. Well, even ideas, even concepts, all that stuff exists within the all. Right? Well, everything under dot is the all, which is everything having to do with existence. And prior to dot is prior to existence. And this is where this stuff gets so wacky, where like, okay, if it's prior to existence, how are we breaking it up into 3 separate things? Right.
Okay, so that's interesting, because that is in I think in Christian theology, there's uncreated. There's the uncreated. God is uncreated, basically, and God's a Trinity. And so we happen to have like 3 things up here.
Well, so. I think you're speaking heresy on one hand, but on the other hand, you're doing what I sent Nima a book. I see he hasn't read as much of it as I have yet, but it's called The Practical Guide to Kabbalism, where he points this out, is that when you learn about the Tree of Life, and again, this is fascinating, and I don't mean you'll learn about it in the terms of Jewish mysticism or Gnosticism or whatever. You just kind of take it as a description of a map of reality, and I guess the things before reality. And when you learn about these weird ass concepts, you naturally start to map other things onto it. And one of the exercises recommended in this book that I sent you, again, A Practical Guide to Kabbalism, I think, was it Gareth Knight or Peter Knight or something like that wrote the book?
Yeah, I have it right here.
He said that as an exercise, you should look at other creation myths. Doesn't matter where they're from, and see if you can map them out onto this tree of life.
Right.
Yeah, there it is. A practical guide to Kabbalistic symbolism. There it is. Now, I brought this up. Can you bring the tree of life back up? I brought this up because we were talking about Christ consciousness. Kether, which is the very top, called the crown, which is supposed to be God, to access that realm is to access the Christ consciousness, essentially. And my understanding of this convoluted crap, right? And so I guess in the Gnostic idea, you're trying to float up out of this Malkuth, the material world, which is at the bottom.
Yeah.
How do you work your way up? And once you cross Da'at, and just to make this even weirder, the author of that book even pointed out if you graph the Buddhist cosmology onto the tree of life, Nirvana is Da'at. It is not Kether. So there's supposedly something behind Nirvana. I don't know enough about Buddhism to comment on that sort of thing. But as you move yourself up, you leave the physical world at some point, the all, by traveling through Da'at, and that gets you up into, it's not even primordial, because primordial would even be like a description of the physical reality. It gets you into this non-existence realm, and once you get up to not Da'at, but Kether, the top, that is your experience with the Christ consciousness, and apparently the Christ consciousness is to be so powerful that any ego that you had, and of course ego has to exist down below. That there's no ego up top because ego is within the category of existence. Any ego that you had would just simply be fried, and I guess you would become one with the Christ consciousness, right? So this description, in contrast to, Jesus was a guy who came here that was the Son of God, and then he died for your sins, and he was resurrected, and here's the life of him actually having the body, and that sort of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And while I'm on this, this may be a fun future show. Maynard James Keenan from Tool, the singer from Tool. He's also known as a singer from A Perfect Circle, and he's been working on his own project called Pucifer for some number of years now. He is obsessed with his shit, and he wrote a song in Pucifer that it'd be fun if we could break it down. As far as I know, I'm the only one who has figured this out. Where the song, it's called "Where's the Line," and it's him pretending to be a preacher in a radio booth, being very goofy and saying these goofy things to these people who call in asking about where's the line of sin. The entire song is a Kabbalistic reference about Da'at, and I can prove it using Aleister Crowley's The Book of Lies. I think that'll be a fun future thing to discuss. But I guess that's a side thing. I wanted to toot my own horn for a second and say I figured it out. I don't think anyone else did. But it's this concept of Da'at, and this concept, utilizing the Kabbalistic tree of life to map spiritual ideas is I actually like doing it. I'm not saying I'm a Kabbalist. I'm just recognizing the fact that breaking down ideas like this is an interesting map and way to look at things. But particularly, I think the way that the Gnostics use this map, is to say, okay, we want to get out of Malkuth, we want to get up toward the Christ consciousness. And this is their view of Jesus, as opposed to the man that actually came here and did the things and died for your sins and was resurrected. Thus, it's a heresy.
I'm wondering if if Jesus, in their view, was then also sent by the greater God, by the good God, in opposition to the demiurge which created this earth.
Like I said, we'd have to talk to a practicing Gnostic. I'm not even sure if they recognize the man Jesus.
Right.
As someone who came here and did things.
Yeah. So talking of practicing Gnostics, I guess we could maybe segue a little bit into the bigger picture of what are who are the groups vying for power?
Well, but before we do that, I want to lay a hefty criticism at Gnosticism.
Yeah.
I don't like it anymore. It was interesting for me to attend that thing and do the meditation or whatever they had, but I don't like it, and I think it was uh, Carol Quigley. I think I read this either in Tragedy and Hope or the Evolution of Civilizations, who basically made the Catholic argument against Gnosticism, which is to say, because Gnosticism rejects the material world so much, they see the whole material world as evil and you don't engage in it. Whereas the Catholic, and when I say Catholic, I mean Catholic and Orthodox in a sense, right, is they recognize that Jesus had a body in the material world. And therefore, the material world is fundamentally good. And that you have to work within the material world in order to improve your spiritual self. So it's not a rejection of the material world. It's saying you have, these are both working together. Jesus, God had a material body. So therefore, what follows from that philosophically is that we must work within the material world to do good things in the material world, in Malkuth, right? In Malkuth, we have to work in Malkuth to do good things. Whereas the Gnostics say, forget it all, it's all bad. Well, what naturally flows from that is, well, there's no point in doing any good things in the material world because we just need to reject it. And yeah. I think that's one of the very strong argument for Catholicism is it really recognizes we must create institutions within the material world to do the things that are good if we want to achieve spiritual goodness. And we can see the results of that, which is, hey, we now live in a civilization that was better than the fucking Axial Age, where everybody was a slave and tortured to death most of the time.
Yeah. Also in Genesis, obviously, God said what he created was good, right? So Christians wouldn't believe that the material world is bad under any circumstance.
Unless you can convince them that God was actually the Satan, and if Satan said it was good, like the Gnostics say, right? Maybe that's their argument for it.
Right, which, yeah. Then they wouldn't be Christians. So
moving on to power structures within the world, Nima.
Right, so the Center for Self-Governance has, Mark here with the Center for Self-Governance has divided the relevant power groups in the world into three groups, right? Communists, Platonists, and globalists. So the Gnostics, they would have to fall under Platonists, right?
Well, I mean, maybe this is something to get Mark on the show for, which I'm
right. But what I'm saying, just in terms of the ideas or the belief system, the Platonists, for example, he said Bill Gates is a Platonist, if I'm not mistaken.
And he says Platoist as opposed to Platonist. I don't know if there's significance to that, but he does say Platonist.
Well, because also, some people say Platonic.
I would say a Platonist is somebody who agrees with Plato's philosophy. Maybe a Platoist is this cabal of Bill Gates fuckers that are trying to actually achieve the thing that Plato described.
But it seems to be the case that there's a lot of people who are in important power positions in the world who want to perfect humanity, who want to cull the earth, who want to create AI mechanisms to let us merge with, who want to create vaccines and medicines and pills and drugs that make us greater somehow, I guess that's what they tell us. Who want to turn us into Marvel superheroes, basically. And so I was just wondering if that's not Gnostic in concept.
Well, I would say it is because, I mean, obviously Platoism is earlier than Gnosticism because there was no Christ consciousness to talk about at that point, right? And Platoism firmly rejects reality in a similar way that Pythagoras did in his map, right? Is that, okay, there's this perfect world that the mind has access to that the earth has nothing to do with. And so the people who have access to that are the philosopher kings, the people who are born gold as opposed to the people who are born silver or born bronze. He just, this is language I'm using that he uses in the Republic. So the philosopher kings that are born gold need to tell everybody else what to do and organize everybody else what to do. And they can't have the, what's the word I want? Irritation of the silver and bronze people trying to make decisions on what need to be done. And the American system, with, as Mark Harris described it, the 7-boundary layer republic, which is unique in terms of republics, because three things going through my head at once. Plato's Republic does not describe anything that looks like what we've got today when we say, no, we're a constitutional republic. Well, and we say that like it means something objective. Well, China is a constitutional republic. North Korea is a constitutional republic. The Soviet Union was a constitutional republic. All these were constitutional republics. They've got a constitution, and they have a republic where you have, you know, representatives and parties and stuff and all that sort of thing. The big deal, the real big deal, is how was power separated. And in Plato's Republic, there was one separation of power. Those who had it and those who don't. So this is the one boundary republic where the philosopher kings have all the power, they have executive power, they have legislative power, and they have judicial interpretation power. And they get to decide what goes, and they have enforcers. Maybe you can imagine the enforcers as the line between these two groups, and everybody else who just has to do what they're told. Now, in the American system, we have the 7-boundary republic, where we've got, okay, there's a line between judicial, legislative, and executive. There's also a line between the federal and the states, which also have their judicial, executive, and legislative. And, you know, I would even argue that, you know, there's more lines below that, because you got the city and you got the county, and they all have their executive, judicial, and legislative, and some of those are broken down into more pieces. I mean, even the legislative itself at the federal level, there's a boundary between there too, because there's two houses, right? So all this power in the American system is just so spread out that it's no group can get it all. And Charles Merriam brought this guy up. He was advisor to 5 different presidents, 4 or 5, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt was one of them. And he wrote the book Systematic Politics, where he basically praises Plato with religious-sounding language, saying Plato's Republic of the City-State is basically the utopian ideal that we need to aspire to. We have these old ideas, which are somehow not older than fucking Plato, of, okay, individual liberty and separation of powers and voting and republic and all this sort of stuff that really gets in the way of the philosopher kings doing what they know is best for everything, and we can't come out and destroy it outright, because it's just not going to work. So the method that he describes to destroy the American system is death by 1,000 cuts, which is to, how do we slowly, one piece at a time, melt the barriers between these various separations of powers, so slowly everything gets melted into one conglomerated unit without anybody noticing. Yeah, here's Nima's pulled up Charles Merriam. So a perfect example of this would be during the COVID lockdowns, excuse me, where we had all these governors declaring these emergency powers. It turned de facto, this is not de jure, it turned de facto the executive power at the state level more and more legislative. It's moving more and more legislative power into the executive branch. Excuse me. And this example is so perfect because it wasn't done like, hey, we're making a constitutional amendment to make this happen. And I mean, there wasn't even a law. It was just kind of the culture kind of sort of shifted that way. And we're still fighting ourselves back out of it, right? This is happening everywhere all the time, from the school board down up, not down up, from the school board up to the presidency. And we've talked about this before, but the whole idea behind the Center for Self-Governance is how do we start drawing those barriers back, right? So and then furthermore, Charles Merriam glorifies the city-state. So again, this is the idea of how do we get the city-state of Seattle? How do we get the city-state of Los Angeles? How do we get the city-state of Miami controlling these greater areas? So we get a situation that looks like the city-state of Plato's Republic. Now, if you read Plato's Republic, it's absolutely fucking terrifying how someone could come up with this and think it's a good idea. And apparently, Plato tried it. He found some king who was amenable to the idea, and it failed fucking miserably, and for whatever reason, this is lost on people like Charles Merriam and Bill Gates. But wrapping this back into Gnosticism, like you were describing, if the Platonic ideal is the driving force to one of the three conglomerated power structures that are vying for control at the moment, and the Platonic structure really creates a separation of, okay, there's the ideal in the mind, or there's this ideal world that's perfect, that only the philosopher kings can have access to, and they need to be the ones to tell everybody else what to do in order to get us closer to that perfection. I can really see the corollary between that and Gnosticism for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And I mean, let's keep pulling that corollary along to say, okay, well, this Platonic idea came around before Christ, and so Christ comes around, and then these people, these heretics, form a group calling themselves the Gnostics, and I mean, I guess it would stand to reason. Could you argue that Gnosticism is kind of a mix between Christianity and Platonism?
And and Judaism also. So the early Gnostic sects were apparently Jewish and Christian. Yes, and I mean, to be fair, even Christianity has a lot of a Greek philosophy in it. I mean, a lot of the church fathers have referenced Aristotle. I don't know if they've referenced Plato, but I wouldn't be surprised if they've done so. So these were ideas that were discussed by all kinds of people throughout the world.
Even the apostles themselves. I mean, so there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I believe it was John who recognized that because they wanted to proselytize this outside of the Hebraic world into the Greek-speaking world and the classical world at large. And he realized if he tries to talk to these people and starts with genealogies from the Hebraic tradition, they're not going to have any idea what he's talking about. He needs to address them in words they understand, and this is why John opens with, at first there was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, however that goes. But E. Michael Jones has made the argument here that the usage of the word is actually a poor mistranslation. We should use the word logos. Because there's a very deep Greek tradition as to what that means. So John knew that, okay, I need to speak to the Greeks in language that they can refer to. And to your point is that the early, not even the early Christian fathers, one of the apostles themselves understood I need to merge the Greek ideas with this Hebraic tradition.
Yeah. And that's where, for example, E. Michael Jones, some people believe that the way the Greek philosophers used the word logos is the same as it was used in the Gospel of John, whereas others believe that no, it just refers to the person, Jesus.
Mhm.
It doesn't actually refer to a word spoken. So
Well, that definitely sounds like a Protestant versus Catholic argument right there. It just refers to Jesus. What else would it refer to? The book says what the book says. Yeah.
It means what it says.
If you want to talk about Greek blasphemy, then go talk about Greek blasphemy. Don't get it on my Jesus. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, sola scriptura, basically throw it all overboard, and the only thing that counts is what's written in this book, and the book fell down from heaven.
Right.
And there's no such thing as human imperfection of interpretation or anything like that. It just is what it is, and it just is what it says there, and that's why there's like 50,000 different Protestant sects. And
that's why they all killed each other at the beginning of the Protestant Reformation, right? I mean,
right.
Anabaptist was basically synonymous with how we would use the term terrorists today, back in the 1500s in Europe, because they would just take over and fucking kill everybody. Just a side note, an entertaining story to listen to regarding this is if you head over to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast. He has a show called Prophets of Doom, where he describes a story of a group of Anabaptists taking over the city of Münster in Germany. Well, it wasn't Germany back then, but taking over the city of Münster, and what exactly happened. And just as a funny note, I guess I don't know how funny this is. In Münster, I guess at the main church, there are still 3 cages hanging from the top of the church steeple, and those 3 cages held the bodies of the 3 leaders of the Anabaptists that took over Münster. And they were tortured to death, and then the bodies were hung up from the top of the church for everyone to see. And those cages are still there on the top of the church for everybody to see it. That's how mad they were at the Anabaptists taking over Münster. We totally got sidetracked. Now we're making fun of Sola Scriptura.
Well, I just pulled up the Münster Rebellion.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Interesting. German, Täuferreich von Münster. Anabaptist Dominion of Münster.
It's the way Dan Carlin describes it. It's such a wild story because I mean, because even the Lutherans were like, Anabaptists, get away from us. Because the Anabaptists took what Luther did and leapt with it, which is to basically say the way I can interpret the Bible myself. And I mean, I guess this is getting back to what we were talking about on Monday. I can interpret the Bible myself, therefore my interpretation is true. Well, then of course we're all going to start fighting and killing each other, right?
Right.
And for whatever reason, the Anabaptists really had this strong focus on the Old Testament, and they tried to like revitalize and take more seriously what was going on in the Old Testament, and they took the book of Acts. So there's the 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and right after that there's the book of Acts, which is basically a description of how Christianity handled itself immediately after the death of Jesus. And the Catholic Church sees the book of Acts as descriptive, where these new Anabaptists saw the book of Acts as prescriptive. You should be organizing yourself the way that the early Christians organized themselves in the book of Acts, which leads to much comedy and chaos, as I recommend that you go listen to Dan Carlin's Prophets of Doom, because it's a fascinating, if not irritating, story to hear what these people do in the city. Nima, do you have any more thoughts on Gnosticism and our power structures and
no, I mean that was
geometry?
That was very helpful. Yeah, I mean, putting these things together, I think it really it just elucidates the picture better and better. And I'm kind of
Spinning.
out of ideas on Gnosticism.
Good.
The only idea that I can think of is we could make fun of this Russian gold standard.
Oh, let's do that another time. Don't. I think we went a decent amount of time. Let's call it here. So this has been Nolan Moore and Nima Majur of IridaTV. We're streaming and doing it live. And we hope to catch you on the next round. Please visit us at IridaTV, where you can find us at the social media of your choice. Telegram is currently our favorite, but wherever you want to go, you can go. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.